Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up the files on the real architects of modern wealth. We're talking about the few individuals who don't just run today's global economy, but actually built the very systems that let them amass, well, breathtaking power, sometimes unprecedented power.
Yeah, this is really an investigation into the kings of capital, a group that, you might be surprised, owns a huge piece of our world, often through pretty complex, sometimes opaque means.
Right. We often focus on the big company names,
hmm
Amazon, GE, Standard Oil.
Exactly. But our deep dive today, it really reveals this timeless playbook, the one used by titans across centuries. We're going to trace it from the original tycoons building physical monopolies,
Like Rockefeller and Carnegie.
all the way to the financial engineers who mastered debt, and now the digital oligarchs who control data.
So that's the mission today. We're synthesizing these core patterns. We're looking at the ruthlessness, the sheer ambition, the financial wizardry, and maybe the strategic secrecy that connects everyone, from Rockefeller right up to Zuckerberg.
hmm And our sources show that while the product changes, oil, then steel, now social media, the fundamental strategies for building these empires, protecting them, making money from them, they stay startlingly consistent.
Okay, so where do we start? With the originals, I assume.
Absolutely. To understand today's power structures, you have to start at the foundations. The original masters, they didn't just compete. They were aiming for total, inviolable control. Let's begin with John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil, the classic monopoly.
Okay. And he didn't just, buy out his rivals, did he? It was more sophisticated than that.
Oh, much more. He mastered this art of ideological persuasion. He used this almost evangelical tone to convince the weaker competitors to join him.
So it wasn't like being conquered, it was framed as being saved.
Exactly. He offered them not just a check, but salvation. The sales pitch was, honestly, masterful. He'd tell these smaller women things like, we will take your burdens, we will utilize your ability, we will give you representation, we will unite together and build a substantial structure on the basis of cooperation.
Wow. So he made individual resistance sound like a failure of responsibility, even patriotism.
Precisely. And the ultimate promise, the hook, was ironclad financial security, tied directly to Standard Oil stock. He often say things like, take Standard Oil stock and your family will never know want.
That's a very modern-sounding promise, but delivered with that kind of 19th century severity. It's powerful. But what allowed him internally to pursue this kind of ruthlessness with a clear conscience, how did he square that?
Yeah, that's key. The sources suggest it was deeply tied to his belief in the doctrine of stewardship, this idea that his enormous wealth wasn't just luck, it was a sign of God's grace.
Stewardship, meaning he had a duty to manage this wealth.
Right. And because he gave so much back through philanthropy, his earnings were justified in his own mind. His giving served as, and this is a quote, incontestable proof of his fortune's purity.
So the philanthropy wasn't just charity, it was also a kind of internal license. It let him pursue accumulation with incredible vigor, regardless of the methods.
That's how he seemed to see it. It let him rationalize actions that others saw as purely predatory.
That's fascinating. A spiritual license for cutthroat business. But his contemporary, Andrew Carnegie, he operated differently, didn't he? More about self-reliance.
Totally different philosophy. Carnegie refused to be beholden to anyone. When people suggested merging with bigger competitors, like Illinois Steel, Carnegie just dismissed it at their hand.
Why? Why not consolidate for strength?
He didn't see the need. He felt his own property was already, quote, on the rock and invulnerable. He didn't need external help because he focused relentlessly on vertical integration, controlling his own supply chain from start to finish.
Makes sense. And the sources also highlight something unique about Carnegie's motivation, right? Success itself became addictive, but maybe not for personal luxury.
Exactly. Once he publicly committed to giving away his entire fortune, which was a huge moral undertaking for him, the money he kept making wasn't really for him anymore. It was for the community.
So making more money meant he could give more away.
Right. It gave him, as the source puts it, additional reasons to remain a steelmaker. It fueled his later philanthropic mission, so he pushed even harder to increase profits.
Okay, so Rockefeller built control through mergers and this sort of ideological persuasion, Carnegie through production efficiency and self-reliance. What about someone like Vanderbilt? Infrastructure.
Cornelius Vanderbilt, yeah. He started out acting like a genuine Viking warrior, taking huge personal risks, competing fiercely on the water.
But he shifted tactics, didn't he? Moved towards something more Stable.
He did. He transitioned into what the sources call corporate statecraft. That's a crucial difference. He built what they described as the greatest corporate fortress to date
What was the fortress?
by achieving a near monopoly on rail transportation into Manhattan. He didn't just run railroads, he controlled the choke point, the entry and exit. That created this physical realm that demanded constant political and economic maneuvering. It wasn't just about winning battles anymore, it was about controlling the map.
Statecraft over the sword, as the source says. And this shift also meant he learned how to protect himself personally from the company's troubles.
Absolutely. We see this really clearly during the Union Trust panic. The bank's trustees demanded Vanderbilt personally pay the corporate debt of the Lakeshore Railroad, one of his companies.
And he just refused, even though it was his railroad.
He absolutely declined. He argued he wasn't individually responsible. His lieutenants were apparently quite distressed, but his refusal showed this really keen awareness of the legal wall between his personal finances and the corporation's liability. Strategic distance from the inevitable losses. A very modern corporate move.
Okay, so infrastructure control. Then you have Henry Ford, who built a different kind of empire, one layered with this deep and, frankly, sometimes odd personal mythology.
Ford is fascinating. On one hand, intensely fascinated by new modern technologies,
Right.
pushing mass production, efficiency, even dabbling in material science. You mentioned the soybean fiber neckties earlier.
Right, the soybean ties, which is pretty out there.
Very. But at the same time, he pursued this profound retreat to the land with projects like Greenfield Village, creating this sort of mythical vision of American agrarian simplicity.
So hyper-modern industrial complex on one side, nostalgic village on the other.
Exactly. It was this strange duality, pushing the world into the future while trying to physically drag the past along with him. And these projects weren't just hobbies. They were tools for his own social and personal purposes, shaping his image.
But this intense personal control, the kind needed to build Greenfield Village or dictate company policy. It became a problem internally, didn't it? Especially with his son, Edsel.
Oh, a massive liability. The sources paint a tragic picture of that relationship.
Yeah.
Henry would publicly tell managers, Edsel's in charge now, do whatever he says.
Okay, sounds like a handover of power.
But then, almost immediately, Henry would reverse his son's decisions. He'd undermine him, set policy himself, just couldn't let go.
Constantly undermining him right after saying he was in charge. That must have been impossible.
It poisoned the atmosphere inside the company. It really shows that for some of these titans, the need for absolute personal control can override even the long-term health or strategic needs of the business itself. Succession becomes almost impossible.
Okay, so if we pull back from these foundational figures, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Ford, what's the common thread? What's the first rule in their playbook?
I think it's clear. The pursuit of inviolable control. That's the goal. Whether it's through dominating the market like Rockefeller, or vertical integration like Carnegie, controlling infrastructure choke points like Vanderbilt, or just absolute personal command like Ford.
The end game wasn't just market share. It was achieving a position that was, as Carnegie put it, on the rock and invulnerable, completely secure.
Exactly. Now let's see how that fundamental rule evolved when the tools shifted, away from steel and rails towards debt and derivatives.
Right, the financialization era.
If the foundational titans built monopolies with physical assets, the modern kings of capital, they built their empires with something less tangible but arguably far more potent: debt and clever financial engineering.
This shift really gave rise to private equity, didn't it, as this new dominant force?
Absolutely. This takes us right into the heart of what you call the financialization machine, where the game isn't necessarily about running a company better in the traditional sense, but about buying it for its predictable cash flow.
Which can then be leveraged, meaning loaded up with debt.
Precisely. The core mechanism is the leverage buyout model, the LBO.
Okay. And there's a specific moment, a data point, that really shows when this kicked into high gear, right? Setting the stage for firms like KKR and Blackstone.
Yes, a really striking one. Between 2004 and 2007, just a 3-year window, the average price paid in large company buyouts jumped dramatically. It went from 7.4 times the company's cash flow
Okay, 7.4 times earnings before debt payments.
to 9.8 times cash flow, almost 10 times.
Wow, wait, let's just unpack that for a second. Cash flow is the money a company reliably makes from its operations before paying its debts. So a buyout firm is buying that future stream of cash. A jump from 7.4 times to nearly 10 times in just 3 years.
Yeah.
That's huge. What drove that? Was it just confidence?
Well, the sources are crystal clear on this. It wasn't some sudden explosion of corporate efficiency or breakthrough innovation,
Right.
almost entirely debt-fueled. Banks and the bond markets became incredibly aggressive. They were willing to promise much larger loans, bigger bond packages, for the same amount of reliable cash flow from the target company.
Okay, so let me get this straight. A buyout firm, using the same amount of their own money, their equity, could suddenly afford to buy a company that was, what, like 30% more expensive in 2007 than just 3 years earlier?
That's exactly it. They were acquiring these massive assets primarily using borrowed money. And here's the kicker. They often loaded that new debt directly onto the balance sheet of the company they just bought.
So the company they acquired essentially had to pay for its own purchase through its future earnings.
That's the essence of the leveraged model. It magnified potential profits for the PE firm hugely, but it also injected profound risk into the companies being bought and ultimately into the whole financial system.
And this model, using debt to juice returns, it wasn't entirely new with PE, was it? Industrial giants had kind of perfected it internally first, like GE under Jack Welch.
Absolutely. Welch at General Electric is a prime example. He mastered what some insiders called the dark art of financialization. He basically transformed GE, this premier industrial company, into something where a huge chunk of the profit came from GE Capital.
And GE Capital, we hear it called a giant unregulated bank. What does that actually mean?
Well, that's pretty much what it was. It was this massive financial services division inside GE. It used GE's stellar industrial credit rating and its stable balance sheet as collateral to back incredibly high-risk lending activity.
Like what kind of activity?
Oh, everything. Aviation financing, commercial real estate, complex debt instruments, insurance products, credit cards, you name it. And because it wasn't technically chartered as a bank, it operated with much less regulatory oversight. It could take risks that traditional banks simply couldn't touch.
The scale of this shift is just wild. By the time Welch retired, you're saying the finance division, GE Capital, it accounted for 40% of GE's total revenues.
40% of revenues and an incredible 60% of its profits.
60%. So a company famous for light bulbs and jet engines had effectively become a lending house.
That's the transformation. And this financial complexity, this internal bank, it gave Welch the ultimate tool for managing Wall Street's expectations.
Yeah.
The ability to manipulate results.
How so?
He used GE Capital to hit or beat analysts' earnings estimates for nearly 80 consecutive quarters. That's 2 full decades of perfect, predictable performance. Unheard of.
80 quarters. How on earth did he manage that perfect record? When you say shifting zeros throughout a sprawling international web of subsidiaries, what does that mean practically? How did they smooth the numbers?
It means essentially accounting wizardry on a global scale. Imagine the industrial side of GE had a weak quarter, maybe engine sales were down. Welch could reach into GE Capital's enormous and incredibly complex balance sheet, which was spread across dozens of countries, and find ways to, say, recognize revenue early from some subsidiary in Europe, or book a profit from a complex derivative trade.
So move money around internally to cover any shortfalls on the industrial side.
Exactly. It became less about actual underlying business growth in any given quarter and more about smoothing the reported numbers to keep Wall Street happy and the stock price up.
A stunning run. And all the while, he was rewarding shareholders with massive stock buybacks and dividends, which just cemented his godlike reputation. But the internal cost, that connects back to the PE model's effects, doesn't it? The sources mention the end of General Electric.
Oh, absolutely. That old culture was gone. It was replaced by an enterprise that was, frankly, sapping employee morale. This intense financial focus meant relentless downsizing, cost-cutting, selling off divisions. It destroyed a lot of the institutional memory and, well, the joy that had defined the old GE.
And that's where that quote comes from. The executive lamenting that loyalty was only 24 hours deep.
Yeah. That really captures it. The focus became entirely on the immediate quarterly number, not the long-term well-being of employees or even sometimes the core business, just hitting the target.
This mastery of financial nuance, it extends beyond corporate accounting into the, let's say, the high-stakes, sometimes shadowy world of finance itself, the black edge, as it's called.
This isn't just strategic accounting anymore. This is the relentless pursuit of non-public information. An informational advantage.
And we see this culture shift really clearly at SAC Capital under Steve Cohen.
Starkly. Cohen demanded that his traders have what he called a fundamental edge. It wasn't enough just to be a smart trader with good instincts anymore.
What did fundamental edge mean to him?
It meant deep expertise or, crucially, connections within a specific industry. something that gave them an informational leg up, knowledge that wasn't widely available. Cohen explicitly called it the end of the era of anti-intellectualism in trading, where just having a feel for the market was enough. Now, you needed to know things others didn't.
And this quest for an edge, sometimes it tipped over into outright illegality, right? Like the Michael Levine case at Lazard. That's almost cinematic.
It really is. He needed confidential documents about a merger. The Kerr-McGee acquisition by Elf Aquitaine, a huge deal.
And how did he get them? Not hacking, right?
Astonishingly simple, really. He got hold of a seating chart for the firm, didn't need complex tech. He figured out the exact physical location, the desk of the banker working on that secret deal.
No way. He just walked up to the desk.
Found the desk, copied the documents, and walked out. It just illustrates how much of high finance, even with all the tech, still relies on exploiting basic human or organizational weaknesses. Security gaps.
These sophisticated financial tactics and the leverage behind them really showed their dark side, their fragility during the 2008 crisis, didn't they?
Yeah.
A crisis fundamentally driven by the same kind of debt-fueled leveraging we saw exploding in the PE world just years earlier.
Absolutely. It all came crashing down. As major institutions like Lehman Brothers just collapsed, others were desperately scrambling for lifelines. Morgan Stanley, for instance.
They were on the brink, too.
Very much so. They had to urgently seek investors, ultimately turning to a sovereign wealth fund, the China Investment Corporation, CIC, for a massive cash injection.
Wow. From Wall Street giant to needing a bailout from China?
The situation was so dire that the CEO, John Mack, felt he had to tell regulators directly, point blank. The markets can't open Monday without a resolution of Morgan Stanley. Just think about that. The sheer power concentrated in these firms, but also their incredible fragility when the leverage unwinds. Global capital laid bare.
And we should probably also touch on the systemic manipulation side, like the LIBOR scandal. That wasn't just one rogue trader, was it?
Yeah. No, LIBOR was systemic. And traders like Tom Hayes, who was kind of central to the effort to skew LIBOR rates, used really nuanced techniques to benefit their own trading positions.
Maybe just remind us quickly what LIBOR was and why rigging it mattered so much.
Sure. LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, was, for decades, the benchmark interest rate. It was used globally to set the price for trillions upon trillions of dollars worth of financial products, everything from complex corporate derivatives down to everyday consumer mortgages and loans.
So when Hayes and others fixed LIBOR, even by tiny amounts, they were fundamentally altering the basis for pricing loans and deals worldwide.
Exactly. Huge ripple effects. And the sources mention Hayes using specific tactics like making bids or offers that were only good for certain banks, or even individual traders he knew were on his side, basically signaling his intentions subtly. Or at one point, just refusing to even consider trades with Morgan Stanley altogether to influence the rate calculation.
It sounds like a culture where exploiting weakness was just part of the job.
It speaks to a culture where finding the Muppet, that was the term, the weak or uninformed counterparty, and basically grinding them into dust wasn't just tolerated, it was seen as essential to winning. It was viewed purely as a trade, a win or a loss. Morals didn't really enter the equation for many involved.
Grim. And Hayes himself ended up incarcerated, but felt some vindication later.
Yeah, interestingly, when some of the alleged co-conspirators he had implicated were later acquitted, Hayes, even though he was in prison, apparently felt a token form of vindication. He realized his decision to cooperate with authorities, which cost him his own freedom, had maybe helped keep others out of jail. A strange twist.
Okay, so pulling this section together, the second major rule in the playbook seems to be the weaponization of leverage and financial opacity. Is that fair?
I think that captures it well. From KKR pioneering massive LBOs like RJR Nabisco using minimal equity, to Jack Welch using GE capital to smooth profits for decades, to financial traders rigging global benchmarks like LIBOR.
The focus shifted. It wasn't just about controlling the physical product anymore, like oil or steel. It became about controlling the very mechanism of capital formation, debt, information, and the complex financial instruments built on top.
Precisely. Now let's shift gears completely again. Away from finance and into the new realm where power is being consolidated. Data. The digital empires.
Right. The new digital and data oligarchs.
If oil defined the early 20th century and leveraged debt the later part, then the new source of capital, the thing everyone wants to control now, is unquestionably data and the digital platforms that collect and refine it.
This is where the 21st century titans operate. The Zuckerbergs, the Bezoses.
And data truly is the new petroleum. There's a PwC estimate that the deployment of AI, which runs on data, will add something like $15.7 trillion to global GDP by 2030. An astounding number.
15.7 trillion. But the really crucial part of that prediction is the geopolitical split, right? Who gets the biggest piece of that pie?
Exactly. China is predicted to take home $7 trillion of that total. $7 trillion. That's nearly double North America's projected $3.7 trillion share.
Wow, nearly double. So you have to ask why. Why the predicted dominance for China in the AI-driven economy?
It seems to come down to the sheer quality and volume of their datascape, as the sources call it.
Their datascape, what does that mean?
It refers to China's ultimate internet universe. Think about how integrated everything is there. Ubiquitous WeChat activity for messaging, payments, services.
Yeah.
Then add O2O, which is online to offline services, massive mobile payment adoption, ride-hailing, bike sharing.
All generating data points constantly.
Constantly. And crucially, often within interconnected ecosystems. This creates these massive, rich data sets capturing real-world interactions in incredible detail.
So it results in this unprecedented, granular mapping of what people are buying, where they're going, how they're moving.
Exactly. In the US and maybe Europe, our data is often more segmented across different apps and platforms. In China, the integration of these services, particularly through super apps like WeChat, creates these singular, massive, fine-grained data sets on individual behavior.
And that gives them a huge advantage in developing AI because AI needs vast amounts of data to learn.
A significant developmental advantage, yes. Especially for AI focused on consumption, transportation, social patterns, predictive modeling.
And this wasn't an overnight thing, was it? China's tech scene had its own evolution.
Right. It started with what people call the copycat era. Chinese startups initially cloned Silicon Valley models pretty closely.
But the real breakthrough came later.
Success, the massive scale we see now, came in a second phase. This was defined by intense, fierce domestic competition. Not necessarily to invent brand new models, but to adapt and optimize the existing ones, specifically for the unique, incredibly demanding, and highly competitive Chinese user base. That relentless optimization process is what created the data advantage they have now.
Okay, so that's the context in China. Now let's look at the titans running the U.S. tech giants. Figures like Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk. They share that same intense commitment to control we saw earlier, but applied to this digital realm.
Absolutely. Take Jeff Bezos at Amazon. His explicit goal was to establish the insurmountable advantage of e-commerce personalization.
He saw something others didn't.
He recognized that historically, even the greatest merchants, quote, never had the opportunity to understand their customers in a truly individualized way. A local shopkeeper might know a few hundred regulars, their preferences.
But e-commerce could do that at scale. For millions.
For hundreds of millions globally.
Yeah.
That was the breakthrough. Amazon could know the specific desires, the predicted needs of a vast population.
And his early efforts were key to this. Things like the Similarities program.
Yes, that internal project, Similarities, was crucial. It evolved into the powerful personalization engines Amazon uses today. They weren't just about showing you what you were currently looking for.
They were about predicting what you'd want next.
Exactly. Predicting your next purchase, suggesting related items, creating this inescapable, highly individualized shopping ecosystem tailored just for you. That's the insurmountable advantage.
And his way of implementing strategy, famously confrontational, wasn't it? Even inside Amazon, like the marketplace decision.
Oh yeah. The decision to launch Marketplace, allowing third-party sellers to compete directly against Amazon's own retail teams on Amazon-owned platform. That apparently upset almost everyone.
His own colleagues, suppliers, they must have felt betrayed.
They did. Many felt he was undermining his own retail business. But the sources say Bezos simply didn't care. His response was basically, as long as it offered more choices to customers, it was the right move.
Laser focus on the customer experience and growth, even if it meant internal conflict.
Total focus. One colleague famously described his attitude as perpetually Jeff against the world. Customer obsession trumped everything else.
Okay, then you have Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, now Meta. His focus, according to board member Mark Andreessen, was always different, right? Not immediate profit, but scale.
Pure, relentless growth over immediate monetization. That was the mantra.
Andreessen said Zuckerberg never argued against making money.
No, not against it. But Zuck fundamentally believed that focusing on anything other than establishing a dominant global franchise first was essentially a waste of time and resources.
So build the kingdom first, then figure out how to tax the subjects later.
That's a good way to put it. You have to own the entire ecosystem, achieve near total market penetration before you start aggressively optimizing the profit margin on individual features or ads. It's that Rockefeller-esque desire for total, unassailable global control, just translated into the data and attention space.
That level of control, that perfectionism, it shows up even in the manufacturing side of tech, doesn't it? Like with Elon Musk at Tesla and SpaceX.
Definitely. Musk is known for his obsessive push for automation, sometimes even when it doesn't quite work initially.
There's that anecdote about the battery packs.
Right. He once described his own fault, his own mistake, in trying to automate the gluing of fiberglass strips onto battery packs. They built this expensive, sophisticated robot to do it.
Man.
And it turned out the robot was just too slow and made too many errors compared to a human worker doing the same simple task.
So even the high-tech visionary runs into messy reality.
It illustrates that messy, frustrating reality perfectly. Even behind the grand vision of total automation pushed by these tech titans, there's often a trial and error process, and sometimes the old ways are still better for certain tasks. Absolute control isn't always immediately achievable, even if it's the goal.
Okay, so if we synthesize this section on the digital oligarchs, what's the third playbook rule for this modern era?
I'd call it ecosystem dominance through data. That seems to be the core strategy.
Meaning they don't just want customers?
No, they want total granular visibility and, ideally, control over consumption habits, communication patterns, social interactions, even attention spans. The goal is to ensure that their platform, their ecosystem, becomes the indispensable choke point of the digital economy. You can't avoid it.
Right. The new infrastructure, but made of data and code. Okay, so we've seen the pursuit of inviolable control, the weaponization of leverage, and now ecosystem dominance through data. What's the final piece? How do these empires protect themselves?
Ah, yes. The final crucial component, opacity. Controlling the narrative, managing the rules, operating outside the harsh glare of public or regulatory scrutiny.
This seems like a constant across all eras, from the robber barons to today.
Absolutely. It's a defining characteristic. Whether you're talking 19th century tycoons or 21st century financiers or tech moguls, mastering the art of operating outside the light is key. Control a political and legal environment, carefully manufacturing reputation, and maintaining absolute personal control.
We see this very clearly with political influence, right? Particularly through figures like Charles Koch and the network he built.
He developed this very deliberate strategy of using, as the sources put it, ambiguous and misleading names for his organizations, think tanks, foundations, advocacy groups.
Why the ambiguous name?
To obscure the true agenda, to make it harder to trace the funding and the coordinated efforts behind their charitable giving and political actions. It's a form of strategic camouflage.
And the charitable giving itself? It wasn't just altruism.
Well, one conservative associate who worked closely with the Kochs called their use of tax-exempt giving, specifically 501c3s and c4s, a shell game.
A shell game? How so?
This associate noted it was far preferable to just paying taxes because it allowed the Kochs to maintain complete control over precisely how that money was spent. And while doing good, it also simultaneously built what this person termed a pretty amazing machine for lobbying and political influence that operates largely below the public radar. Tax benefits combined with political power.
This pattern of seeking influence, maybe monopolistic advantages through connections, it also shows up in other parts of the world, like the Asian godfathers.
Yes, the sources describe a common pattern where some major Asian business empires focus less on pure free market competition and more on obtaining a share of a monopoly and then cutting costs.
How do they obtain that share of a monopoly?
Often through close political ties, which can help secure licenses or favorable regulations. And the cost-cutting side sometimes involves suppressing union activity or constraining wages, perhaps by bringing in cheaper foreign labor where possible. It's about securing a protected position first.
And reputation management is key here, too. Like
Yeah.
the Li Ka-shing example, he faced a credibility crisis at one point.
Big time. After he forced his company to pay out a massive special dividend, basically extracting huge cash for himself, it left the company financially weakened and facing intense suspicion of insider trading. Major hit to his reputation, especially with international investors.
So how did he manage that? How did he restore trust?
Strategically, he hired a highly respected Western executive, a Guelo, as the term was used, named Simon Murray, to be the chief executive of his flagship company.
And Murray's job wasn't necessarily operational. It was about optics.
Primarily optics, yes. The main function, according to the source, was to bring much-needed credibility, to reassure minority shareholders and the global investment community that their interest would be protected, that there was a trustworthy Western face at the helm. It helped offset the suspicion raised by Lee's aggressive financial maneuvering. It was about buying legitimacy.
That need for credibility, for a clean image, becomes absolutely vital when your core business itself is controversial or harmful, which brings us inevitably to the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma.
Right. Their story is a masterclass in reputation management, what the sources call a delicate campaign spanning decades.
What was the goal of this campaign?
To completely decouple the family name, Sackler, from the product they sold, OxyContin, and the resulting opioid crisis. They worked incredibly hard and successfully for a long time to ensure the Sackler name was exclusively associated with high-profile philanthropy wings at the Met, donations to Harvard, Yale, the Louvre.
While keeping it completely separate from any negative coverage about the prescription opioids.
Exactly. Out of any negative coverage relating to the prescription opioids they sold, as the source puts it. It was a deliberate, long-term strategy to build a firewall between their public image as philanthropists and the source of their immense wealth.
And this campaign of obscurity, this manufactured reputation, it worked for a long time, until the sheer scale of the crisis became undeniable.
It was remarkably successful for years. The dam really broke during the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy proceedings. That's when documents started emerging that quantified the public health disaster.
Like the data from United Health.
Exactly. Just one insurer, United Health, disclosed that hundreds of thousands of its policyholders had been prescribed Purdue opioids and were subsequently diagnosed with an opioid use disorder. Hundreds of thousands from just one insurance company.
Which completely blew up the narrative Purdue had pushed for years, right? That addiction was rare when opioids were prescribed by a doctor.
It starkly challenged that narrative. The sheer volume of diagnosed addiction cases, just from that single data point, showed the devastating systemic scale of the crisis that their very delicate PR campaign had managed to obscure for so long.
Finally, there's the ultimate form of control and opacity, absolute personal control, creating your own reality tunnel.
Howard Hughes seems like the archetype here.
Hughes is the classic case study in that kind of extreme isolation and control. He detested anything that threatened his carefully crafted public image, the image of the genius of the aviation industry, the lone inventor, the master dealmaker.
And there was an incident with the Defense Department. Yes. He was forced, essentially, to make a crucial business decision within 90 days or face a mass walkout of key personnel, a deadline imposed from outside.
And he hated that, not because of the money involved.
The sources say he was furious, but not primarily because of the financial stakes, which were huge millions of dollars. He was furious because the forced deadline, the external pressure, threatened to tarnish his image of being the ultimate, self-directed master of his own domain, operating on his own timeline. He couldn't stand being forced by others.
And the isolation required to maintain that control was just profound.
Almost unbelievable. There's that detail about his personal doctor. The doctor only visited Hughes when summoned, which could be days or weeks apart. So to pass the time while basically waiting on call in isolation.
He learned to make violins and paint watercolors.
Exactly. Learned entirely new, time-consuming skills just waiting for a call from Hughes. The man's entire ecosystem, his inner circle, was completely bent to the will in the utterly unpredictable schedule of that central controlling figure.
And this need for secrecy and control extends to manipulating the legal environment too, like with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, the sources highlight how wealth can be deployed to manage legal threats. When a prosecutor known for focusing specifically on sex crimes and crimes against children was assigned to Epstein's case in Florida,
Epstein's legal team reacted.
Immediately. He quickly added a new, high-profile lawyer to his team. This lawyer happened to be an associate of the local U.S. attorney. And crucially, that new lawyer's own law partner was married to the very prosecutor who had just been assigned the Epstein case.
Wow. So using connections to potentially neutralize a threat.
It highlights how wealth can be used strategically to try and redirect, manage, or at least gain intelligence on perceived threats within the legal system simply through the skillful deployment of well-connected legal counsel. It's about managing the environment to maintain secrecy.
Okay, so the final playbook rule seems to be the weaponization of secrecy and legal ambiguity. Is that right?
I think that covers it. Whether it's obscuring political influence like the Cooks, manufacturing reputational shields like the Sacklers, or maintaining absolute personal and legal control like Hughes, or attempting legal influence like Epstein, the goal is always to operate as much as possible outside the light, away from public or regulatory scrutiny.
Okay, so we've traced this playbook through four key strategies: inviolable control, weaponized leverage, ecosystem dominance via data, and now weaponized secrecy. If we synthesize all that, what does it tell us about the kings of capital today?
Well, it tells us the historical playbook has evolved dramatically in its tools, but not necessarily its core ambition. Rockefeller controlled the physical supply of oil. Today's titans aim to control the flow of data, the terms of capital, the narrative itself. But that underlying ambition for total unassailable control, that seems remarkably consistent across centuries.
The core patterns seem clear now. They master the strategic use of immense debt sometimes, as we saw, even to buy otherwise healthy companies and load them up. They leverage data and platform dominance to create these inescapable digital ecosystems.
hmm And they exert this total mastery of operating outside the light, using sophisticated legal structures, political influence, and carefully crafted public relations to avoid scrutiny.
So this leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for our listeners. It's rooted in that lament about lost loyalty at GE, that 24 hours deep comment.
Right. The big question is the current generation of power figures,
Yeah.
the leaders at the giant private equity firms like KKR and Blackstone, the heads of the big tech monopolies, are they acting as modern industrialists? Are they genuinely building efficiency, creating lasting societal value, maybe like Carnegie, at least in his own view, aspired to?
Or have they simply become masters of a different game? Have they perfected the art of maximizing profit primarily through financial engineering, through data extraction, accelerating wealth accumulation, often from value that others originally built?
If the primary outcome of these dominant strategies inside many of these modern empires is, as that former GE executive complained, that loyalty really is only 24 hours deep.
Then the core tension defining global capital today seems to be this. Are today's kings of capital truly creating long-term value, or are they just extracting it at an unprecedented and perhaps ultimately unsustainable rate? That's something to think about.